The Hells Angels biker found the little girl pinned behind a church, and his furious justice silenced every witness. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. In the cold, dim light of a Sunday morning, as the streets of the city remained empty, a lone biker roared down the deserted avenue. His motorcycle's engine growled beneath him, the deep rumble echoing off the stone buildings, as he steered the bike with the precision of someone who had ridden these streets for years. His leather jacket, adorned with the unmistakable Hells Angels patch, made him a figure to be feared. He had seen things in his life that no one should ever have to witness. His name was Jack Reaper Morrison, a man who had long ago sworn off attachments, preferring the freedom of the open road. As he rode past the old church, a faint sound caught his attention. It was soft at first, just a whisper carried by the wind. But then, it came again, a desperate cry for help. Jack slowed his bike, eyes scanning the surroundings. Behind the church, in the shadow of the tall stone walls, he saw her. A little girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, pinned under a broken wooden beam, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Her small body trembled in fear, her hands clutching the debris as though it was her only lifeline. She looked up at Jack, wide-eyed, as he approached, her fear evident in the way she recoiled. But Jack didn't hesitate. Without a second thought, he dismounted the bike and rushed to her side, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hey, it's okay. I've got you," he said, his voice gruff but gentle. She flinched, pulling back as if he were the very danger she feared. But Jack gently placed his hand on her shoulder, his touch surprisingly soft for a man so rough around the edges. "I'm not here to hurt you," he reassured her. "Let's get you out of here." The girl's eyes locked onto his, a mix of suspicion and fear in her gaze. But as Jack carefully lifted the beam off her, she did not protest. She was too scared, too weak to do anything but let him help her. He could feel her small body trembling under his hands as he picked her up, cradling her against his chest. His instincts kicked in. He needed to get her somewhere safe. As Jack carried her to his bike, the weight of the moment settled on him. The streets were still empty, and the air was eerily silent, except for the faint sound of the girl's sobs. It was then that Jack realized just how much this moment was affecting him. The walls he had so carefully built around his heart were starting to crack. "What's your name?" he asked softly, trying to break the silence. The girl hesitated before answering in a whisper. "Emily." "It's going to be all right, Emily," Jack said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside him. He placed her gently on the seat behind him and fired up his bike. The engine roared to life once more as they sped off, leaving the abandoned church behind. The wind whipped past them, but for Jack, the ride felt different this time. For the first time in years, he was carrying someone else's burden, and it was something he wasn't sure he was ready for. As they made their way down the winding streets, Jack knew that this wasn't just a random act of kindness. He had been given a chance to make things right, to protect someone who needed him. But the question was, would he be able to protect her from the dark forces that seemed to be closing in around them? As Jack sped down the empty streets with Emily clinging to his back, the cold wind tearing at their faces, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another ride. It felt different. The quiet, the weight of the girl behind him, the urgency in her breath, it all gnawed at him. His mind was racing. Emily had been in pain, her small body trembling with fear, but it was the look in her eyes that haunted him. She was terrified, yes, but there was something more. She was hiding something. Jack wasn't sure what, but he had learned over the years to trust his instincts, and they were telling him that this was no ordinary rescue. His bike roared as they turned into a small alleyway behind an old, run-down building. The place looked abandoned, its windows boarded up, its door hanging off its hinges. It was the perfect hideaway, hidden from the eyes of the world. He slowed the bike and parked it by the door, cutting the engine as the sound of the world outside grew distant. He turned to Emily, who was still trembling in his arms. Her face was pale, her hair matted with dirt and sweat. She was exhausted, but her eyes were wide open, scanning their surroundings with a mix of fear and curiosity. "This is where we're going to stay for a while," Jack said softly. "You'll be safe here, okay? I'll take care of you." She didn't say anything, just nodded weakly, clutching his jacket tighter as he helped her off the bike. Jack's garage wasn't much, but it was his sanctuary. It had been his home for years, a place where he could escape from the chaos of the outside world. It smelled of motor oil, rust, and the faint traces of the life he had left behind when he walked away from the Hells Angels. There were no questions here, no judgment, just peace. He led Emily inside and helped her onto the old couch in the corner of the room. He pulled a blanket from a nearby shelf and wrapped it around her small body. The place was cold, but it was warmer than the street outside. Jack went to the small kitchen area, heating some water for tea. As the kettle hissed, he stood there, lost in thought. His life had been filled with chaos, violence, and betrayal. But now, for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of responsibility, a sense of purpose. He had no idea what had happened to Emily before he found her, but he knew that he couldn't just walk away. Not this time. Not after everything she had been through. He returned to the couch with a steaming mug of tea and sat down beside her. "Drink this. It'll help you feel better," he said gently, holding the mug to her lips. Emily looked up at him, her big brown eyes full of questions. She took the mug, her small hands trembling as she held it. She didn't say anything, but Jack could see the faintest hint of trust in her gaze. "What happened to you, Emily?" he asked quietly, his voice laced with concern. She took a slow sip of the tea before speaking, her voice barely a whisper. They took me from my house," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know where I was. I was scared." Jack's heart sank as he listened to her words. Whoever had done this to her, whoever had taken her from her home, had to pay. He had no tolerance for people who hurt kids. None. But he couldn't help but wonder who would do something like this. Who would target a little girl? And why? "Who took you?" Jack pressed gently. Emily hesitated, looking down at the mug in her hands. "I don't know," she said softly. "But they said they would come for me again." The hairs on the back of Jack's neck stood on end. This wasn't just a random act of violence. This was personal. Someone was after her, and they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Jack clenched his fists. He knew he had to protect her, no matter what it took. His eyes hardened as he stared at the floor, his thoughts racing. He had spent his life running from his past, from the things he had done, but now, for the first time, he knew he had a reason to fight. He couldn't run anymore. Not when there was someone to protect. "I won't let them get to you, Emily," Jack said, his voice low and steady. "I'll make sure you're safe." But deep down, Jack knew this was just the beginning. He could feel the storm brewing, the danger creeping closer. He didn't know who was after Emily, or why, but one thing was certain. He would find out, and he would make them pay. As Emily settled into the couch, Jack turned his attention to the window. He could feel the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. This wasn't a normal day. It wasn't a normal job. It was something much bigger. And he was in this fight now, whether he liked it or not. Jack sat on the worn-out chair, his eyes fixed on the girl lying on the couch, her small body wrapped in the thick blanket he had found for her. The dim light from the old lamp on the corner cast shadows across the room, but his mind was a storm of thoughts. He had promised to protect her, but what was he really protecting her from? The streets outside had grown silent, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Whoever had taken Emily had to be close by, and Jack knew it was only a matter of time before they came looking for her. Emily had fallen into a troubled sleep, her breathing slow but steady, her face calm now, a stark contrast to the terror that had gripped her just hours before. Jack stood up and walked to the window, peering out into the darkness. His hand instinctively went to the gun tucked into the waistband of his jeans. He wasn't a man who liked to use violence, but he had learned long ago that it was sometimes the only way to survive. The memory of the Hells Angels still haunted him, a brotherhood of violence and power that had shaped his life in ways he didn't like to admit. But it was a part of him. He couldn't erase it. Not now, not when there was someone else to protect. He felt his muscles tighten as he thought about the dangers Emily was facing. Whoever had taken her wasn't just looking for revenge, they were after something bigger. Jack had seen the signs of a larger operation at play. But who could be behind it? As if on cue, there was a knock on the door. Jack's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't flinch. He knew what he had to do. He walked over to the door, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, and paused for a moment, listening. Another knock, more insistent this time. Jack's hand hovered over the door handle as he took a deep breath. He wasn't ready for this. Not yet. But Emily needed him, and he wasn't going to back down. With a quick motion, he opened the door. Standing there in the shadowed doorway was a tall man, his face partially obscured by a hood, but Jack could tell by the posture, the stance, that this was no stranger. This was someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "You're looking for the girl," Jack said, his voice low and steady, but there was a hint of tension that wasn't lost on the man. "I don't know what you're talking about," the man replied, his voice rough, with a hint of a smirk. "I think you do," Jack responded, his hand still resting on the door frame. He didn't need to say more. He could see it in the man's eyes. The man took a step forward, but Jack didn't budge. "She's not here," Jack said firmly, his words cutting through the air like a blade. "Leave now." The man's smile faded, replaced by a hard edge. "You don't get to decide that," he said, his voice taking on a dangerous tone. "I'm not leaving without her." Jack didn't hesitate. He swung the door open wider and stepped out, blocking the man's way. He wasn't afraid. The years of being a Hell's Angel had taught him how to deal with men like this. The man took a step back, clearly sizing Jack up. "You're making a mistake," the man said, his tone dark and warning. Jack didn't respond. He just kept his eyes locked on the man's, knowing that if it came down to a fight, he would finish it. The tension hung in the air like a thick fog. They both stood there for what felt like an eternity, neither one moving. Finally, the man gave a short, sharp laugh. "Fine," he said, "but don't think this is over. You'll regret this." With that, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. Jack stood there for a moment, his heart still racing, his muscles still tight with adrenaline. He had known this confrontation was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. He walked back inside, closing the door behind him, and leaned against it, trying to steady his breath. Emily stirred on the couch, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at him, confusion and fear in her eyes. "What happened?" she asked, her voice weak. Jack looked at her, his gaze softening. "Nothing you need to worry about. You're safe," he said, though even as he said it, he knew that wasn't entirely true. But it was the only thing he could offer her for now. As the night dragged on, Jack sat by the window, watching the empty street. He knew the man would be back, and he knew it wouldn't be long before more of them showed up. Whoever was after Emily wasn't going to stop until they got what they wanted. And Jack wasn't going to let that happen. Not on his watch. He would fight. He would protect her. And he would find out exactly who was behind this. But one thing was certain, this was far from over. Jack's past was catching up with him, and he couldn't hide from it any longer. But this time, he wasn't alone. This time, he had someone to fight for. The morning came, cold and crisp, as Jack stood by the window, his eyes scanning the empty streets outside. The quiet of the morning was broken only by the occasional rumble of distant engines, but Jack knew better than to relax. The man who had come to his door the night before was just the beginning. He could feel it in his bones, the tension in the air, the weight of what was about to happen. He had made a promise to protect Emily, but he hadn't realized just how much danger that promise would bring. As he paced the room, his mind raced with questions. Who were these people looking for her? Why was she so important to them? The memories of his time in the Hell's Angels flashed through his mind, memories of betrayal, violence, and dark secrets. He had left that life behind, but it seemed that life wasn't done with him yet. The knock at the door broke his thoughts, and his hand instinctively went to the gun at his side. He wasn't sure if it was the same man from the night before or if it was someone else, but he knew he had to be ready. He opened the door cautiously, his eyes narrowing as he saw the familiar figure standing before him. It was a man from his past, someone he never thought he'd see again. The man was tall, with a weathered face and a scar that ran down his left cheek. "Jack," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. "You've got a lot of nerve, showing your face around here." Jack didn't flinch. He had known this day would come, and he had made peace with it. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone steady. "I'm here for the girl," the man said bluntly. "I know you've got her. You need to hand her over." Jack's heart raced, but he didn't show it. He knew this man, knew what he was capable of. He had seen it before, back in the days of the Hell's Angels. But things were different now. He wasn't the same man he had been then. "She's not going anywhere," Jack replied firmly. The man stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. You don't understand, do you? She's not just some kid. She's part of something much bigger. And if you don't hand her over, you'll be signing your own death warrant. Jack stood his ground, his eyes never leaving the man's face. I'm not giving her up, he said, his voice cold. You can tell your friends that. The man's expression darkened, and Jack could see the anger simmering just beneath the surface. But he wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. The man let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. You really think you can protect her from us? You've been running from your past for too long, Jack. It's time to face the music. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Jack standing at the door, his heart pounding in his chest. Jack closed the door slowly, his mind racing with the weight of what had just happened. He knew he had to act fast. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about his past catching up with him, about the life he had tried to leave behind coming back to claim him. He walked over to Emily, who had been lying on the couch, her eyes wide with fear. She had heard the conversation, and she could see the look on Jack's face. What's going on? She asked, her voice shaky. Jack sat down beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. You're in more danger than you realize, Emily, he said, his voice soft but firm. These people, they're not going to stop until they get you. And I'm not going to let that happen. Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she looked up at Jack, fear and uncertainty written across her face. What do we do? She whispered. Jack looked at her, his eyes hardening with resolve. We fight back, he said simply. I'll protect you, no matter what it takes. But we need to move fast. They're not going to give up easily. He stood up, his mind already racing with plans. He needed to find out who these people were, what they wanted, and how to stop them before it was too late. But as he turned to leave, Emily's voice stopped him. Jack, she said softly. He turned back to her, his eyes softening. I don't want to be a burden, she said, her voice trembling. Jack shook his head, a small smile crossing his lips. You're not a burden, Emily. You're family, and family protects each other. With that, he grabbed his jacket and made his way to the door. He knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but he also knew that he wasn't going to let anyone hurt her. Not now, not ever. Jack's hand tightened on the doorframe, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just made the decision to fight, to protect Emily at all costs, but now the gravity of the situation was sinking in. He had known it wouldn't be easy, but this was bigger than he had imagined. Whoever was after Emily wasn't just a random thug. They were part of something far more dangerous. The man who had come to his door last night wasn't just some stray. He was connected to something dark, something that could destroy everything Jack had worked for. And now, he had to keep Emily safe. He turned to her, his mind racing with the implications of the warning. Listen to me, Jack said, his voice steady but low. You have to stay here, in the garage, no matter what happens. It's the safest place. Emily's wide eyes met his, her small face full of fear and uncertainty. She nodded, but Jack could see the hesitation in her gaze. He knew she was scared. She had every right to be. But Jack wasn't going to let anything happen to her. He wouldn't let history repeat itself. He had already lost so much, and he wasn't about to lose her. I'll be back soon, Jack said, his voice softer now. Lock the door, stay hidden, and don't let anyone in unless it's me, understood? Emily's lips trembled as she nodded. I'm scared, she whispered. Jack crouched down beside her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. I know, he said quietly, but you're not alone. I'm here, and I'll protect you. With a final, lingering look, Jack stood up, grabbed his leather jacket, and stepped into the cool morning air. The street outside was still quiet, but Jack knew the calm wouldn't last. He could feel it in his bones. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than usual, as if something was lurking just beyond the corner. Jack had never been one to back down from a fight, but this felt different. It wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about something bigger, something personal. Jack walked towards his bike, his boots hitting the pavement with each step, steady and deliberate. As he straddled the motorcycle and started the engine, the low rumble of the Harley-Davidson filled the silence. He adjusted the rearview mirror, scanning the street once more, and then he hit the throttle, speeding off into the unknown. As he rode through the city, Jack's mind replayed the events from the past few days. Emily's terrified face, the warning from the man at the door, the promise he had made. He had no idea who was after her, but whoever they were, They weren't going to stop until they had what they wanted. The thought of Emily, alone and vulnerable, waiting in the garage, gnawed at him. He had to find out who was behind this. He had to protect her. Jack's ride was fast and purposeful, the wind rushing against his face as the bike surged forward. He didn't know where he was going exactly, but he had a feeling he knew where to start. The Hells Angels network had a way of showing up when things got ugly. Jack had been part of that world once, but it was a lifetime ago. Still, he knew the connections. He knew how to find people who could point him in the right direction. As he reached the outskirts of the city, Jack made a sharp turn down a narrow street that led to a rundown warehouse. It was dark, its windows boarded up, and the place had a sense of foreboding to it. He parked his bike and dismounted, taking a deep breath. This was the kind of place where answers were found, but so were enemies. Jack wasn't sure who was inside, but he was prepared for anything. He approached the door, his hand resting on the handle of the knife tucked into his belt. A low, almost imperceptible sound reached his ears, and he froze. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Jack's instincts kicked in, and he pressed himself against the wall, his breath shallow as he waited. The footsteps grew louder, and then a figure appeared in the doorway. Jack didn't move, didn't speak. He waited for the figure to come closer, his heart racing. The man stepped into the dim light, his features coming into focus. It was the same man who had come to his door last night. The man who had threatened him. Jack's hand gripped the knife tighter. "You followed me," Jack said coldly, his voice carrying the weight of years spent in the shadows. The man smirked, his eyes glinting with menace. "You didn't think you could run forever, did you?" he replied. Jack didn't respond. He didn't have to. He was ready for this. He had been ready for a long time. The man took a step forward, but Jack moved first. In one swift motion, he lunged at the man, knocking the knife out of his hand and slamming him against the wall. "Stay away from her," Jack growled, "or I'll make sure you regret it." The man laughed, the sound dark and twisted. "You think this is just about you?" he sneered. "You're a fool." Jack pressed harder, pinning the man to the wall. "Tell me who's after her. Now." The man's grin faltered for a moment, and Jack saw the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. For a split second, it looked like the man was considering his options. But then, his eyes darkened, and he spat on the floor. "You're already too late," he muttered. Jack's blood ran cold as the man's words sank in. He had to move fast. Emily was still in danger. But now, Jack knew the fight wasn't just about survival. It was about uncovering a dark secret that went deeper than anything he had ever imagined. Jack stepped back, his breath heavy as the man slumped against the wall, his body limp and defeated. The words echoed in Jack's mind. "You're already too late." They gnawed at him, making his gut tighten with dread. Whoever was after Emily had made their move, and they were not stopping. The man's half-hearted resistance had only fueled Jack's determination to protect her. He grabbed the man by the collar and yanked him up, their faces inches apart. "What do you mean, too late?" Jack growled, his voice low and threatening. The man's eyes flickered with something, fear or defiance. Jack couldn't tell. "You really think you can stop them? You're just a pawn," the man spat. Jack's grip tightened, but the man's words struck a chord. Was he really just a pawn? Had everything he'd been doing, all the violence he had survived, just been a part of someone else's game? "Tell me who is behind this," Jack demanded, his voice steady but edged with urgency. The man didn't answer. Instead, he laughed bitterly, a hollow, cruel sound. "You'll never find them. They're too powerful, and they'll make you pay for interfering." Jack knew the man wasn't bluffing. Whoever these people were, they had power. Real power. He shoved the man against the wall again, his anger boiling over. "I won't let them hurt her. Tell me what I need to know." The man's face twisted in pain, but Jack could see the resignation in his eyes. "You won't stop them. But fine, I'll tell you this. They're already on their way. You think your little garage is safe? It's not. They're coming for her. And they won't stop until they get what they want." Jack's heart raced. Emily was still at the garage, vulnerable and unaware of the danger closing in. He had to get back to her, but he knew that his time was running out. He left the man slumped in the corner, his mind already racing with a plan. As Jack walked toward the door, he heard the man's voice call after him, weak but insistent. "Don't be a fool. They'll come for you too, biker. You can't hide from them. No one can." Jack didn't turn around. He didn't need to hear any more. He had made a promise to Emily, and nothing, Not even the threat of an unstoppable force was going to stop him from keeping it. He ran out of the warehouse, his boots pounding the pavement as he made his way to the bike. His hands shook as he started the engine, the familiar roar of the motorcycle filling his ears. The streets were quiet now, but Jack knew that silence wouldn't last. The city felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode. His mind flashed back to the night he first found Emily, her terrified eyes staring up at him, pleading for help. He remembered her fragile body in his arms, the feeling of responsibility settling over him like a weight. He couldn't let her down. Not now. Not ever. The streets blurred as Jack sped through the city, his heart thudding in his chest with each passing second. He had to get back to the garage, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. He glanced in the rearview mirror, but the road behind him was empty. Still, the feeling of being pursued lingered in his gut. The closer he got to the garage, the more tense the air became. The wind howled around him, the sky darkening with the promise of a storm. Jack knew the fight was coming, and when it did, he wouldn't be alone. He had Emily to protect, and that meant going up against whatever hell was coming for her. As he reached the end of the street, the garage came into view. The building was silent, still, but Jack knew that it wasn't a safe haven. Not anymore. He parked the bike and looked around, his instincts on high alert. He could feel the weight of the threat closing in. He pushed open the door to the garage, his eyes scanning the darkroom. Emily was still on the couch, curled up under the blanket, her breathing slow and steady. Jack breathed a sigh of relief. She was safe. For now. He walked over to her, gently shaking her awake. "Emily," he whispered. "Wake up. We need to move." She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked up at him, her face full of confusion and fear. "What's happening?" she asked softly. "We're leaving," Jack said, his voice firm. "There are people coming. We need to go now." Emily sat up, her small body trembling as she looked around. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice shaking. Jack didn't have an answer. He didn't know who they were, but he knew that they were coming, and they wouldn't stop until they had her. "I don't know, but we don't have time to wait," Jack said, his voice urgent. "Grab your things. We're leaving." Emily nodded and got up, her hands trembling as she hurried to gather what little she had. Jack kept watch by the door, his mind racing as he thought about their next move. He had to get her out of here, but where could they go? There was no safe place. Not anymore. As Emily finished packing, Jack grabbed her by the arm and pulled her toward the door. "Stay close," he said, his voice low. "And don't make a sound." They stepped into the cold night air, the city stretching out before them, dark and unforgiving. Jack knew this wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about staying one step ahead of the darkness that was closing in on them, and he wasn't going to let it win. Jack's heart raced as he and Emily moved through the narrow alleyway, the darkness pressing in around them. He kept his eyes fixed on the path ahead, but every nerve in his body screamed that something wasn't right. The air was thick with tension, and despite the silence, Jack could feel the weight of danger lurking just beyond the shadows. Emily was close behind him, her small footsteps echoing softly on the pavement. He glanced over his shoulder, seeing the fear still etched across her face. She had been through so much already, and now, with every step, the danger seemed to grow. Jack didn't want to scare her more, but he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. "Stay close, Emily," Jack muttered under his breath, his voice low but steady. Emily nodded, though her trembling hands betrayed her fear. She didn't say anything, but Jack could see it in her eyes, the uncertainty, the confusion. She didn't know where they were going, but she trusted him. For now, that was all that mattered. They turned the corner, and Jack slowed his pace, peering down the street ahead. It was still quiet, but he knew it wouldn't stay that way. He had to get them out of the city, out of the reach of whatever was coming for Emily. Jack had been to enough places like this to know that when things went quiet, it usually meant something bad was about to happen. He could feel eyes on them, even though no one was around. It was the kind of feeling that only came with years of experience, and Jack knew better than to ignore it. He checked his surroundings again, making sure they weren't being followed. The coast was clear, for now. "We need to get to the warehouse," Jack said, glancing at Emily. She looked up at him, her face pale in the dim light. "The warehouse?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's the only place I know where we'll be safe for now," Jack replied, his voice steady. He didn't want to scare her, but he couldn't lie to her either. He had to get her to safety, and that meant moving fast. Just stay close. We'll be there soon. The walk seemed to take forever, the silence stretching out between them. Jack's mind was racing with plans, but he didn't have much time. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. They reached the end of the alley, and Jack paused, looking both ways before stepping into the open street. He had been to this part of town before, back in the old days. It wasn't a place he liked to go, but sometimes it was the only place you could hide. Stay quiet, Jack muttered to Emily as they crossed the street. The warehouse was only a few blocks away, but every step felt like it was taking them deeper into the unknown. The lights of the city flickered in the distance, but the closer they got to the warehouse, the darker the area became. Jack's instincts were on high alert. They were being watched, he could feel it. He turned down another street and stopped in front of a large metal door. It was old, rusty, but it would do. He pulled out a key from his jacket pocket and unlocked the door. The creaking sound of the door opening echoed through the empty street. In here, Jack said, glancing around before stepping inside. Emily followed him without question, her wide eyes darting around the dark, cold interior. Jack closed the door behind them, the sound of it locking firmly in place. They were safe, for now. Jack flicked on a small light in the corner, revealing the old warehouse in front of them. It was dusty and filled with old machinery, forgotten tools, and the remnants of a life Jack had left behind. But it was the safest place they had right now. Jack motioned for Emily to sit on the old couch in the corner. She did so quietly, her eyes still filled with fear. Jack stood for a moment, staring out into the shadows, his mind working. Whoever was after Emily, they weren't just going to give up. And if they had found him once, they could find him again. He needed to act fast. He needed to get ahead of them. He paced the floor, the sound of his boots clicking against the concrete floor breaking the silence. Emily's voice cut through the stillness. "What now?" she asked, her eyes following him as he moved. Jack paused, looking at her, his heart heavy with the weight of the situation. "Now we wait," he said. "We wait and get ready. They'll come for us. And when they do, we'll be ready for them." Emily nodded quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Jack could see that she was exhausted, but there was a determination in her eyes that matched his own. She had been through more than any child should ever have to endure, and yet, she was still here, still fighting. Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He would protect her. He had to. He walked over to the workbench, pulling a few tools from the shelves, his mind already planning their next move. They couldn't stay here forever. But for now, they had to be patient. Jack glanced at Emily one last time, his eyes softening. "You're safe here, Emily. We're going to get through this. I promise." Emily gave him a small, fragile smile, her eyes filled with hope. Jack smiled back, but the weight of what was to come hung over them both. The silence in the warehouse grew, but Jack knew it wouldn't last. Not for long. Jack paced the room, the silence pressing in on him like a heavy weight. Every so often, his eyes would flicker to Emily, who sat quietly in the corner, her small frame wrapped in the blanket Jack had given her. She hadn't said much since they arrived, her silence reflecting the same unease Jack felt. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The darkness of the warehouse seemed to grow thicker with each passing minute, and every sound, every creak of the building, sent a ripple of tension through his body. He had told Emily they would be safe here, but as the hours dragged on, that sense of security started to slip away. Jack's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. Whoever was after Emily wasn't going to give up. They had to know he was hiding her here. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. He wasn't afraid of confrontation. He had faced worse in his life. But this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't just about him. This time, it was about Emily, and he would do whatever it took to protect her. The sudden sound of a distant engine broke through his thoughts, and he froze, his hand instinctively going to the gun holstered at his side. His heart skipped a beat. The sound was faint, but it was unmistakable. The engine of a motorcycle. He moved quickly to the window, peering through the grime-streaked glass. In the distance, he could just make out the silhouette of a figure riding down the street. Jack's pulse quickened as the figure drew closer. It was too far to make out details, but Jack had spent enough time on the road to know what it meant when someone was approaching in the dead of night. Whoever was on that bike wasn't just passing through. They were looking for something. Or someone. He turned back to Emily, his expression hardening. "Stay quiet," he whispered, his voice low but urgent. Emily looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with fear. Jack could see the uncertainty in her face, but she nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. He moved to the back of the warehouse, staying in the shadows, his movements slow and deliberate. He kept his eyes trained on the door, every muscle in his body tense. The sound of the engine grew louder, and Jack could feel the pressure building. Whoever was out there wasn't going to stop until they found what they were looking for. The footsteps that followed the sound of the motorcycle were heavy, deliberate. Jack's grip on his gun tightened. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to act now. He stepped forward, moving swiftly but silently, his body blending with the darkness. He reached the door just as a figure emerged from the shadows. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, his face obscured by a helmet, but the rest of his gear was unmistakable. A biker. And not just any biker. This was someone from Jack's past. Jack recognized the patches on his leather vest, the unmistakable insignia of the Hells Angels. The man stopped just outside the door, his eyes scanning the warehouse, his posture tense. Jack's hand hovered over the handle of his gun, but he didn't draw it yet. This was someone who knew him, someone who had been part of his world. But things had changed, and Jack wasn't sure where this man stood anymore. The biker took a step closer to the door, his boots thudding softly against the floor. Jack held his breath, waiting for the man to make his move. "I know you're in there, Jack," the biker said, his voice gruff and familiar. Jack's heart skipped a beat at the sound of his name. This was no coincidence. They had found him, and they had found Emily. Jack stepped out of the shadows, his voice cold and steady. "What do you want?" The biker didn't flinch, his gaze hardening as he took a step closer. "You know why I'm here," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You've been hiding her. It's time to hand her over." Jack's jaw clenched, his hand tightening around the grip of his gun. He had known this moment would come, but he wasn't ready to give up. Not now, not after everything they had been through. "I'm not giving her to anyone," Jack said firmly, his voice low but filled with defiance. The biker smirked, shaking his head. "You really think you can stop us? You're nothing but a relic, Jack. You can't protect her." Jack's eyes narrowed. "I'm not protecting her because I have to," he said, his voice steady. "I'm protecting her because I made a promise. And I'll die before I let you take her." The biker took a step back, his eyes scanning Jack's face, sizing him up. "You're making a big mistake," he said, his tone cold. "You can't fight this, Jack. You never could." Jack didn't move, didn't flinch. "I'm not fighting for you," he said. "I'm fighting for her." The biker's expression darkened, and Jack could see the shift in his posture. The fight was coming, whether Jack wanted it or not. "So be it," the biker said, his voice low and dangerous. He reached for something at his side, and Jack's instincts kicked in. In a split second, he lunged, grabbing the man by the arm and slamming him against the wall. The sound of the impact echoed through the empty warehouse, but Jack didn't care. He wasn't going to let anyone hurt Emily. Not again. The biker struggled, but Jack's grip was like iron. He wasn't going to let go. "You should have stayed away," Jack growled, his voice filled with fury. The man gritted his teeth. "You think this is over?" he spat. "You're just a dead man walking, Jack." Jack's pulse was racing, but he didn't stop. He had made his choice. He wasn't running anymore. He was done being hunted. Now it was time to fight back. The biker struggled under Jack's grip, his body slamming against the cold concrete wall of the warehouse. The force of the impact rattled the man's bones, but Jack's hold was unyielding. He could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins, each heartbeat thundering in his chest. The man cursed, his hands scrabbling at Jack's arm in a futile attempt to break free. Jack's face was inches from his breath steady but his thoughts racing. "You want her, don't you?" Jack growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You'll have to go through me first." The biker's eyes flashed with something dark, something dangerous. He didn't answer immediately, just gritted his teeth and shoved his knee into Jack's stomach. The blow was hard enough to knock the wind out of him, but Jack barely flinched. He tightened his grip on the man's arm, pulling him back against the wall and raising a fist. "Don't try me," Jack said coldly, the words sharp like a blade. "You won't win." The biker finally spoke, his voice hoarse but full of venom. "You're wasting your time. You're too late. She's already marked. There's no hiding from them." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "Marked? Who are you talking about?" The biker let out a bitter laugh. You really don't know, do you? He spat, blood dribbling from his lip. You're just a pawn in a game much bigger than you. The people after her, after both of you, they don't stop. Ever. And neither will I. Jack's jaw clenched, his grip tightening even more. He didn't want to hear this. He didn't need to. The only thing that mattered was Emily, keeping her safe from whatever was coming for her. The realization hit Jack like a sledgehammer. Whoever was after Emily wasn't just some random criminals. They were part of something much bigger, something organized, ruthless, and determined to get what they wanted. And Emily was at the center of it. "Oh, I don't care about your threats," Jack said, his voice steady, his resolve unshaken. "You want her? You'll have to go through me. And you won't like the result." The biker's expression twisted with frustration, but he didn't struggle any longer. His eyes, dark and wild, flickered with something close to fear, but Jack wasn't sure if it was from Jack's words or the realization that this was the end of the road for him. "You're too far gone, Jack," the biker muttered. "They'll make sure you pay. You and the girl. I'm just the messenger." Jack's mind spun, trying to piece together the cryptic words. "Who are they?" he demanded again. The biker didn't respond. Instead, he jerked his head toward the door. "They're coming," he said quietly, the words barely above a whisper. Jack's heart skipped again, his pulse quickening. "You think you can stop them?" the biker added with a mocking laugh. "You're already dead." Jack didn't hesitate. He knew what he had to do. He lifted the biker by his collar, dragging him to his feet. "I'm done with you. Tell your bosses that I'm coming for them," Jack said, his voice a low growl. The biker said nothing, his face pale as Jack shoved him aside and turned toward the door. His mind raced as he tried to piece together the puzzle. He had to find out who these people were, what they wanted with Emily, and how to stop them before they got any closer. But one thing was clear. The biker's words weren't just threats. They were a warning. Jack opened the door and stepped outside, his eyes scanning the street. It was still quiet, but Jack could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The weight of what was happening pressed down on him. He could feel the danger closing in, the sense that time was running out. Jack walked toward the bike, his hand instinctively resting on the handle. He glanced over his shoulder at the dark, empty warehouse, a place that was no longer safe. Emily was still inside, but Jack knew they couldn't stay there. They had to move, and fast. He started the engine and revved it, the sound of the bike roaring to life. He glanced at the door one last time before pulling away from the curb, the wind biting at his face. As he sped down the street, he wasn't sure where he was going, but he knew he couldn't waste time. The people after Emily were getting closer, and Jack wasn't going to let them win. As he rode through the night, his mind raced with plans, with questions. Who were these people? What did they want with Emily? And why had they targeted her? But there was one thing Jack knew for sure. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. He would protect Emily with his life if he had to. The darkness of the night surrounded him, but Jack's resolve burned brighter than ever. He wasn't done yet. The fight was just beginning. Jack's bike cut through the night, the hum of the engine a steady rhythm beneath him. His thoughts raced faster than the wheels spinning on the asphalt. He had taken Emily to the warehouse, hoping it would provide them some time to regroup, but now everything had changed. The biker had been right. They weren't safe there anymore. The tension in the air was palpable, and Jack could feel the danger closing in. He had always been good at running from trouble, avoiding confrontations when necessary, but this time was different. This time, he wasn't running. He wasn't going to let anyone take Emily. He couldn't. The cold wind stung his face as he sped through the streets, the neon lights of the city flashing past him in a blur. His mind was fixated on the words the biker had left him with. They're coming for her, and they won't stop until they get what they want. Jack gripped the handlebars tighter, his knuckles white from the pressure. Whoever these people were, they were more dangerous than anything he had faced in his past. He had left the Hell's Angels behind for a reason, but now it felt like that past was hunting him down, dragging him back into a world he had worked so hard to escape. But Emily had become his responsibility, and he wasn't going to let anything happen to her. He made a sharp turn, heading toward the outskirts of the city. The roads grew quieter, the buildings less frequent, and the darkness seemed to swallow everything around him. The isolation felt like a warning. The sounds of the city were gone, replaced by the steady hum of his engine, and the rhythm of his heart, pounding in his chest. Jack wasn't sure where he was going, but he needed to get Emily to a place where they could regroup. They couldn't keep running forever. As he neared an old industrial park, Jack slowed the bike, pulling into a dimly lit lot. The place looked abandoned, the kind of place that offered nothing but silence and shadows. Jack's instincts told him to stop, to lay low for a while. He killed the engine, listening to the echo of the bike's final rumble fading into the night. He glanced around, his eyes scanning the dark corners of the lot. It was a ghost town, nothing but rusted buildings and broken windows, but Jack had learned to trust his gut. This felt like the right place. He helped Emily off the bike, his eyes never leaving the shadows. She seemed more fragile than ever, her small frame trembling slightly in the cool night air. He placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to offer reassurance, but the look in her eyes told him she could feel the danger too. They had no idea who was coming for them, or why, but Jack wasn't about to sit around and wait for the inevitable. "Stay close," Jack said, his voice firm. Emily nodded, her hands clutching the sleeve of his jacket as they moved toward an old storage building. The door creaked as Jack pushed it open, revealing a dusty, empty space inside. It was a far cry from the safety of the garage, but it would have to do. Jack locked the door behind them, securing it as best as he could. He could feel Emily's unease, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder, but Jack didn't let himself get distracted. He was on edge, too, constantly scanning the room, listening for any sound that didn't belong. He didn't have much time. As Emily settled on the floor, Jack walked over to a corner, examining the space. There was nothing here but old crates and abandoned machinery, but it was the silence that unnerved him the most. They had nowhere to hide, no backup, just the two of them against a threat they didn't fully understand. The only thing Jack knew for sure was that whoever these people were, they weren't going to stop. Jack's mind flickered back to the words the biker had said, "You're already dead." Those words haunted him, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a knot of fear settle in his stomach. He had faced down his own demons before, but this was different. Emily had been dragged into something she didn't deserve, and Jack was going to make sure she made it out alive. His jaw clenched as he turned back to her. She was sitting on the floor, her knees drawn up to her chest, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "It's going to be okay," Jack said, though even he didn't believe the words. Emily didn't answer. Instead, she looked up at him, her eyes searching his face, looking for something, anything, to reassure her. Jack sat down beside her, his mind still racing. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you," he said quietly, his voice softer now, though the weight of his promise hung in the air. "We'll figure this out. We just need to stay sharp." Emily nodded slowly, though Jack could see the doubt in her eyes. She had been through so much already. He had no idea what kind of power these people had, but he wasn't going to let them take her without a fight. As the minutes ticked by, the silence in the room became unbearable. Jack's mind was working overtime, trying to come up with a plan, but the reality was that they had few options. The only thing he could do was keep moving, keep fighting, and pray they didn't run out of time. Just then, a faint sound reached Jack's ears, the sound of tires rolling on gravel. His body tensed. Someone was coming. Jack stood up, his eyes narrowing as he turned toward the door. They had no time to waste. They were about to face whatever was coming for them. And this time, Jack was ready to fight. He wasn't going down without a fight, and neither was Emily. Jack's senses were on high alert as the sound of tires on gravel grew louder. The faint echo of the approaching vehicle sent a wave of adrenaline through his body. He had no idea who was coming, but he knew it wasn't someone bringing good news. The warehouse, once a sanctuary of silence, now felt like a trap. His eyes flicked to Emily, sitting in the corner, her wide eyes locked on him. She was trembling, her small hands clasped tightly in her lap, but there was something more in her expression now, a quiet understanding that danger was closing in. Jack moved quickly, his steps purposeful as he checked the door once more, making sure it was locked. He could hear the engine idling outside now, waiting. His hand instinctively went to his gun, the cold steel of the weapon offering a brief comfort before the reality of what was coming hit him. They weren't just going to walk in. Whoever was coming for Emily would be looking for a fight. Jack's grip tightened on the gun as he glanced toward the back of the warehouse. There was a small window, just high enough to peer out of, and he moved toward it, crouching low. From his vantage point, he could see the outline of a black SUV parked just outside. The vehicle wasn't familiar, but the way it parked, no hesitation, no sign of uncertainty, told him everything he needed to know. They were prepared. Jack's heart pounded as he checked the room once more. The warehouse had a few hiding spots, but nothing that would keep them safe for long. He had no illusions about this fight. Whoever was after Emily had power, resources, and numbers. But they didn't have him, and Jack wasn't going to let them take her. He moved back toward Emily, kneeling down in front of her. She looked up at him, her face pale but determined. "Stay close," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I need you to trust me." Emily nodded without a word, her small hand reaching out for his as she stood up. Jack's mind was working quickly. He needed to buy them some time, keep the attackers from reaching Emily before he could get them out of there. He had no plan, no backup, but he wasn't backing down. The door creaked faintly as the footsteps outside grew closer. Jack didn't wait. He pulled Emily with him, leading her to a stack of crates near the back of the warehouse. It wasn't much, but it would give them a few moments to prepare. Jack crouched behind a large crate, his breath steady despite the rising tension in his chest. He heard the door handle turn, the faintest click echoing through the room. Jack's body tensed, his finger hovering near the trigger of his gun. The door swung open, and Jack's eyes narrowed as 4 men stepped inside. They were tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in dark clothing that blended into the shadows. Their faces were hidden, but Jack knew exactly who they were. They weren't just men looking for a girl. These were hunters. The leader of the group spoke first, his voice low and calm. "We know she's in here, Jack," he said. Jack's grip on the gun tightened. "If you want her, you're going to have to go through me," he said, his voice steady. But there was no mistaking the fury that laced every word. The leader smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that," he replied. Jack didn't wait for him to move. He lunged from behind the crate, firing a shot that rang through the warehouse. The leader's men ducked, but Jack had already moved, positioning himself between them and Emily. He fired another shot, this one grazing the shoulder of the man closest to him. The man yelped in pain, but Jack didn't stop. He kept his focus, his eyes locked on the leader, who was now advancing slowly, carefully. "You're making a mistake," the leader said, his voice eerily calm. "You think you can win this fight? You've been running from the truth for too long." Jack gritted his teeth, his finger itching on the trigger. "I'm not running anymore," he snapped. He fired another round, narrowly missing the man's chest but getting closer. The leader didn't flinch, but his eyes narrowed in anger. "You think you can protect her? She's not yours to protect, Jack." "She never was," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. Jack didn't answer. He just moved, his body quick and fluid, firing at the next man who tried to rush him. The shot hit the man in the leg, sending him sprawling to the ground. Jack wasn't sure how much time had passed, but the room was starting to fill with the acrid smell of gunpowder. The fight was far from over, but Jack wasn't backing down. He couldn't, not with Emily in the same room. The leader's eyes flickered briefly toward Emily, but Jack's next shot stopped him cold. The man's eyes returned to Jack, cold as ice. "This isn't over," the leader muttered, his voice low and dangerous. "We'll be back. For her. And for you." Jack didn't flinch. He knew the fight was far from over. But for now, they had won this round. The men slowly backed away, vanishing into the darkness of the warehouse. Jack stood still, his gun still raised, watching the shadows long after they had disappeared. He didn't lower his weapon until he was sure they were gone. Slowly, he turned to Emily, who had stayed hidden behind the crate. She was breathing hard, her eyes wide with fear, but there was something else in her gaze now, trust. Jack lowered his gun and knelt in front of her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. "We're safe for now." But Jack knew the truth. They were never going to be safe. Not until he found out who was pulling the strings and put an end to it once and for all. The silence in the warehouse was deafening after the men had left. Jack stood motionless, the faint smell of gunpowder hanging in the air like a reminder of the chaos that had just unfolded. His heart was still pounding in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins, but his body knew the danger wasn't over. He couldn't afford to relax. Not yet. His eyes scanned the dark corners of the room, searching for any signs of movement. The danger had only retreated for the moment. He could feel it in his bones, the calm before the storm. He slowly turned to Emily, who was sitting on the floor, her back pressed against the crates, her wide eyes locked on him. Her small body trembled slightly, but there was something else in her gaze now. It was a kind of quiet strength, a look that told Jack she was ready to face whatever came next. "Are you okay?" Jack asked softly, though he already knew the answer. He could see the fear still in her eyes, but there was also trust, a bond that had formed between them in the last few hours. Emily nodded, but her voice was shaky. "I'm fine, just scared." Jack walked over to her, kneeling down beside her. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, trying to offer some comfort. "I know you're scared, but we're in this together, all right? We'll get through this. I'll make sure of it." Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with questions. "Who were they?" she asked quietly. Jack took a deep breath. He hadn't told her everything yet. She didn't need to know the full extent of the danger they were in. Not yet. He had to keep her focused, keep her from losing hope. "I don't know exactly," he said, his voice steady but his mind racing. "But I know they won't stop until they get what they want. And we can't let that happen. Not on my watch." Emily nodded again, her expression softening as she took comfort in his words. Jack stood up, moving toward the door to the warehouse, listening intently. The silence felt heavy now, like a trap waiting to spring. The men had come for Emily, but they had retreated. For now, Jack had to assume they would be back. And when they did, they would be ready for a fight. Jack's thoughts turned to the future. He couldn't stay here forever. He had to move, find a way to get Emily out of harm's way. But the question was, where? He didn't have the resources he needed, no backup, no allies to call on. All he had was his resolve. And that, he knew, would have to be enough. He turned back to Emily, who had stood up now, her hands still shaking. "We need to go," Jack said, his voice firm. "We can't stay here. I don't know how long we have before they come back, but we have to move." Emily looked at him, her fear evident again. "Where will we go?" Jack didn't have an answer. "Not yet. I'll figure it out. For now, we have to stay one step ahead. They're not going to stop, and we have to be ready for whatever comes next." He moved quickly, grabbing a bag from the corner and stuffing it with the essentials. Emily watched him, still processing everything that had happened. She didn't fully understand the danger they were in, but she trusted Jack. She had no choice. Jack walked back to her, handing her the bag. "Take this," he said. "Keep it close." She nodded and took the bag, her small hands gripping it tightly. "I'm scared," Emily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack looked down at her, his heart tightening. "I know, but you're not alone, Emily. You're with me now, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." Emily looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and trust. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack gave her a small, reassuring smile. "We'll get through this. I promise." They moved toward the back of the warehouse, where the exit led into a narrow alley. Jack paused at the door, his senses alert. The night air was cool, and the city outside was quiet, but he knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. They had to move fast. He glanced back at Emily, who was standing beside him now, her expression still wary but determined. "Stay close, Emily," Jack said, his voice low. "Don't make a sound unless I say so." She nodded, her hand finding his as they stepped into the alley. The night was still, but Jack's instincts told him they weren't alone. They had to stay ahead of whoever was hunting them. They moved quickly, Jack's mind racing with thoughts of what was next. They couldn't keep running, but they also couldn't afford to be caught. Not yet. As they turned the corner and disappeared into the shadows, Jack's mind was already planning their next move. They had a long road ahead of them, and he didn't know where it would lead. But he did know one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let anyone hurt Emily. He had made a promise, and he was going to keep it, no matter what it took. Jack moved quickly through the dark streets, the cold night air biting at his skin. Emily was close behind him, her footsteps quick but soft as they kept to the shadows. They had to stay hidden, stay quiet. The past few hours had been a whirlwind of danger, and though they had evaded the men once, Jack knew it wouldn't be long before they came back. It was only a matter of time before the enemies who had been hunting them would close in again. His mind raced, trying to piece together the pieces of this twisted puzzle. Who were they? What did they want with Emily? Why had she become a target? He couldn't answer any of those questions yet. All he knew was that they had to keep moving. The warehouse, the place they had hoped would offer a little safety, was no longer an option. The biker's words had been clear. They were coming for her, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. Jack glanced over at Emily, her small form trying to keep up with his hurried pace. She had been through more than any child should ever have to endure, and yet she remained at his side, silent but trusting. Jack felt a pang of guilt in his chest. She was too young to be in this mess, too innocent. And yet, here she was, running for her life, relying on him. He promised himself he wouldn't let her down. They reached the end of the alley, and Jack paused for a moment, scanning the street ahead. It was eerily quiet, but Jack knew better than to assume they were safe. He motioned for Emily to stay close as they moved out into the open. The streetlights above flickered, casting an uneven glow across the pavement. Jack's eyes narrowed as he surveyed their surroundings. They couldn't stay on the streets for long, but they couldn't just rush into hiding either. He needed a plan. The sounds of approaching footsteps reached his ears, the faint shuffle of boots on concrete. Jack's body tensed. He turned to Emily, his voice low but urgent. "Get inside that building," he whispered, pointing to an old storefront nearby. "Stay there until I come back. Don't make a sound. Do you understand?" Emily nodded, her eyes wide but focused. Jack could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else too, a glimmer of resolve. He didn't have time to think about it. They didn't have time for anything but survival. Jack watched as Emily darted toward the building, disappearing into the shadows. As soon as she was inside, Jack turned back to face the street. The footsteps were getting louder. Jack didn't wait to see who it was. He stepped into the shadows, blending into the darkness, his body moving silently. He needed to get the drop on them. Whoever these people were, they weren't just after a little girl. They were after something bigger. Jack could feel it. He had seen too much in his life to be fooled by their calm demeanor and calculated movements. They were playing a game, and he wasn't about to let them win. The footsteps grew louder, and Jack's heart raced. He crouched low, staying as still as possible. The shadows hid him well, but he couldn't afford to make a sound. The first of the men appeared at the corner, walking slowly, his eyes scanning the area. Jack tensed, waiting for the perfect moment. The man came closer, his back turned to Jack. This was it. Jack moved in, fast and quiet. He grabbed the man from behind, clamping a hand over his mouth and pulling him into the shadows. The man struggled briefly, but Jack was too quick. He slammed the man against the wall, his arm across his throat, cutting off his air. "Who are you?" Jack demanded in a low voice, his grip tightening just enough to make the man squirm. The man's eyes widened with panic. He tried to speak, but Jack squeezed harder, just enough to remind him who was in charge. "I'm not asking again," Jack growled. "Who the hell are you?" The man's face turned red as he gasped for air. "You don't know what you're messing with," he finally croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "They'll come for you. For her. And you won't survive." Jack's jaw clenched. "I'll survive." He slammed the man back into the wall, his grip tightening once more. "Now tell me who's after her." The man's eyes flickered to the side, a silent warning. Jack followed the man's gaze, but before he could react, a voice echoed from the shadows. "Let him go, Jack." The voice was cold, familiar, but it wasn't a voice Jack wanted to hear right now. He turned, his heart sinking as he saw the figure emerging from the darkness. It was the same man who had spoken to him before, the leader of the group, the man who had been hunting Emily. Jack released his grip on the first man, pushing him to the ground. He stood, facing the leader, his fists clenched at his sides. "This ends tonight," Jack said, his voice low and threatening. "I'm not letting you take her." The leader smiled, his eyes gleaming with something dark. "You think you can stop this? You've been running from the truth your whole life, Jack. And you'll keep running. We won't stop until we have her." Jack's blood ran cold. "I'll die before I let you hurt her." The leader's smile faded, replaced by a hard look of determination. "Then you'll die trying," he said, stepping forward. Jack didn't hesitate. He lunged at the man, but before he could make contact, the other men appeared, surrounding him. Jack was outnumbered, but he wasn't going down without a fight. The sound of a struggle filled the street as Jack fought back, his body moving with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. He was willing to do whatever it took to protect Emily, and that meant giving everything he had in this final fight. As the fight raged on, Jack's mind was clear. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for Emily's future, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that away.